is Danny Winborn, and I am here to introduce our author, and she's going to be in conversation. I am on the Gaithersburg Book Festival Planning Committee, and I welcome you on behalf of our Mayor Judd Ashman and the founder of the Gaithersburg Book Festival and all of our committee members. And we're so happy that you could join us today. I'm also a planning commissioner here in the city of Gaithersburg. We're pleased to bring you this fabulous festival thanks in part to our generous support from our sponsors, including our title sponsor, the Carnegie at Washingtonian Center, and all of our visitors. When you see them, please join us in expressing our deep appreciation. A few announcements. Please silence all of your devices so we can focus on our author. For the latest updates, you can follow us on Gaithersburg Book Festival on Facebook and on Twitter. Your feedback is immensely valuable to us, and please take a few minutes to fill out and submit a survey on our website, gaithersburgbookfestival.org, or by using the QR codes that are around here at the festival. By submitting a survey, you'll be entered into a drawing for a Visa gift card, and if you win, you got to split it with me. Our author, Lauren Francis-Sharma, will be signing books immediately after this presentation. Copies of her book are on sale at the Politics and Prose area in the Activity Center. A quick plug for buying the books. I just bought a bunch, and I always spend too much money, so I just love books. But it does help our festival, and if you buy a lot of books, the more books we can sell at our event, the more publishers that we can have and the more we can help out with sponsoring this event. So if you enjoy this program and you're in a position to do so, please buy some books here today at the Activity Center. I'm extremely excited to introduce our author, Lauren Francis-Sharma, and her latest novel, Casualties of Truth. This is the story of Prudence Wright, her husband Davis, her artistic son Roland, and a man from her past. And if I mispronounce this, please correct me, okay? Mashadiso. Alrighty. When she was a law student in South Africa nearly 30 years ago. Ms. Francis-Sharma has an incredible way of weaving historical accuracy into her prose that allows any reader to be immersed in the story and not want to put the book down. I love this book, and I hope you enjoy the conversation about Casualties of Truth. I actually stayed up till about 3 o'clock reading it last week. Now about the author, Lauren Francis-Sharma. She's a child of Trinidadian immigrants, and one might say she's Trini to the bone. She's an extremely credentialed scholar. Ms. Francis-Sharma holds a degree in English literature with a minor in African American Studies from the University of Pennsylvania, a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Michigan Law School, and an MFA from the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. Wow, how does she have time to write? She's always in school. She is a book reviewer for the San Francisco Chronicle and a MacDowell Fellow, and also the assistant director of Bread Loaf Writers Conference at Middlebury College. Now, a little bit about our conversationalist, Holly Smith. Holly Smith is editor-in-chief of The Independent, as well as a college lecturer, longtime freelance writer, and a proud Jeopardy bronze medalist. Yay! Before joining The Independent, she was managing editor of Maryland Life magazine. Her work has appeared in the Washington Flyer, Washington Post, CNBC.com, USA Today, Travel's 10 Best Salon, Washington Flower, Brainchild, and many other publications. She's also co-authored a travel guide, Seafood Lovers Chesapeake Bay, which is ironic since she does not eat fish. But you can find her on Blue Sky and at H. Smith Writers. The Gaithersburg Book Festival is proud to have Ms. Lauren Francis-Sharma in conversation with Ms. Holly Smith. Please help me warmly welcome these two distinguished ladies.
Okay, thank you. Well, I am thrilled to be talking to Lauren here today. I got to meet her a couple weeks ago at our Washington Writers Conference, so it's great to talk to you again. And I warned you that I was going to start off with a current event. I was actually here a few years ago interviewing Dolan Perkins Valdez about Take My Hand, and that was a book set in the 50s, and it was about abortion. And so it seemed like, oh, well, this is safely historical fiction. You know, how could this be relevant now? And then earlier that same year, Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I had a similar feeling reading your book because it's about apartheid. And oh, well, apartheid is in the past now, isn't it? And then just this week, apparently there's a white genocide going on in South Africa, and apartheid is back in the news. And that I want to know how that lands for you and what you make of it.
Well, it's great publicity, I have to say. It is ironic. I didn't set out to write a book about current affairs. I didn't expect that we were going to be here. When I started writing this book, we were pretty firmly entrenched in COVID, and the previous administration was in office. I didn't foresee that we would be here again. But, one of the things I love about, by the way, the book is about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings that happened in South Africa, and it took place in 1996. And so the hearings were really supposed to bring in people from both sides of the conflict to essentially tell the story of what they'd done so that they could actually receive amnesty from the government so they wouldn't be prosecuted. I was there in 1996 watching this take place, and the most important part for me about those moments was the telling of the stories, and that they were preserving the stories for the record for forever, that people were actually allowed to sort of tell what had happened to them and for other people to receive it and to hear it. And so one of the interesting things about it, of course, is this penance that many of the former prosecutors of the apartheid era were doing on stage to get this amnesty. And now it feels odd to watch this same group of people, maybe not the same, but these representatives of this sort of horrible oppressive government saying, oh, it didn't work for us, we'd like to take it back. It's very angering. But I do have friends in South Africa, and I know that this is a very fringe group. One of the interesting things about the National Party winning in 1948, when they won the election that became the apartheid era, is that they were a fringe group as well. They were not expected to win that election, and they stayed in power for 50 years. And so it's such an interesting piece of history to think about, given what we're seeing today, and let me just say, by the way, these refugees who are showing up, I don't expect they're going to be here very long. Living in America is much, much harder. There will be no 3 maids. There will be no people picking your vegetables at, well below minimum wage. I mean, it's going to be so fascinating. I hope that a journalist watches them every day. Like, I'm so excited to see when they head back.
But it is a reminder that the past is never really the past.
Yeah,
it's always present. You referenced briefly that you were in South Africa during the commission. Can you talk a little bit about how that came to be, how you came to be there, and what you were doing, what you did there during your time there?
Yeah, well, like my character, Prudence, right? I was a law student at the time that I went to South Africa for the first time, and I was working at a law firm, and we were actually helping people with their amnesty applications. We were working for the ANC. We were filling out their applications. These were people who were already in prison, and we were trying to assist with that. And so one day, my boss says to me, I think you really should go to the hearings. They're actually being held here in Johannesburg for the week. You should go and see what this is about. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll go. It'd be cute. So naive. And then I show up, and I realize, oh, this is really different than what I thought it was going to be. This is devastating and horrible. And I knew that it was devastating and horrible, but to listen to people tell about murder and kidnapping and torture it was a lot. And, I wasn't the only person weeping at the end of every day, right? We were doubled over listening to some of this testimony. One of the stories that I tell in the book is about 8 boys who had been fooled into getting on a bus one morning. A black double agent. He was working for the South African Security Force. He told them that he was part of the ANC, the African National Congress, and he would take them to go learn how to be freedom fighters. They were going to go to another country and they were going to do resistance fighting. And these boys were ages 12 to 17. And they didn't tell their parents what they were doing. They thought they were going to come back as sort of heroes. And they were taken onto the bus, taken to a safe house, tortured, put back on the bus, and the bus was detonated and thrown over a cliff. I am sitting there at that moment watching their mothers and their fathers learn what happened to them for the very first time. And I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. And it was devastating. And over and over and over again, these stories kept coming out. And I kept thinking to myself, why doesn't anyone at home know? Why don't we know?
Well, talking a little bit about your protagonist, Prudence, because she's the heart of the book. And if you don't know, the book is actually told in 2 timelines. It's Johannesburg in 1996, and then it's Washington, D.C. and the environs in 2018. And Prudence is there as a young woman in Johannesburg, and then as an adult, a woman, a wife, and a mother. And she's a successful black woman and has all the trappings of wealth and power and all that. But she also underwent significant trauma in Johannesburg. And so I want to know how you developed her as a character, or how she came to be developed, someone who is very strong and also vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I felt like it was really important to, if I was going to write a book that was set in South Africa, I didn't want to write a South African story. I didn't feel like it was my right to write a South African story, but I could write a story about an American woman going to South Africa and seeing the similarities between, and the differences, but many times the similarities between her country and this country that initially she feels is very backwards, or, maybe 40 or 50 years behind where America is. And so there is sort of like a slight smugness that she carries with her into this.
She's American.
She's American, very American. And she gets there, and lo and behold, she begins to sort of realize that everything she thought wasn't really coming to fruition. Like, she thought that she was going to feel at home. She thought she would be sort of accepted in a different way, and yet everyone who sees her as an American, and that is very disorienting for her. So I wanted to show the vulnerability of young people who are Americans. They go abroad and they're sort of shaken by the experience, because I think many of us have had that experience. And I wanted to show in this incident that happens to her at a gas station in Johannesburg, I wanted to show how horrific the violence of that country was, but how similar it is to the violence that she could easily have experienced here, and actually had experienced sort of as a bystander here as well. So drawing the parallels. So you have this very vulnerable young woman in 1996, and she's put it behind her in 2018, or so she thinks. And she's, as you mentioned, very successful. She's, a lawyer, business consultant. She's now staying at home with her child who is on the spectrum. And she shows up to dinner one night with her husband, who is introducing her to the new IT tech at their firm. And lo and behold, it's a man that she met while she was in South Africa. And she wants no part of telling this story, and particularly no part in her husband knowing about this story. Yeah.
That brings me to my next question, because the most confounding character in the book to me, the one I didn't know what to make of him, but the most intriguing, and that's Machiriso, the man she meets at the
I
restaurant.
thought you were going to say her husband.
No, Machiriso.
Okay.
So he's pivotal to Prudence in the present, in the scene. There's a long restaurant scene in the beginning in 2018, but also very much in the past. How did he come to be as a character? Because he in a way, he doesn't play true to type. Like he can be suddenly very vulnerable, in these flashes, but otherwise very hard and very scary at places.
Yeah.
Where did he come from?
Yeah, and he has some charm as well. Yeah,
he's
yeah.
very charming.
He comes from the South Africans that I met. He comes from the experience of being in South Africa during the apartheid era, all the complexities of that. Many people who applied for amnesty were given amnesty, or they were not prosecuted, even if they weren't given amnesty. So there were a lot of people who had actually committed horrible, horrible crimes who were walking at the mall next to you, and your brother would have been murdered by them, and you're sort of, with them at this place. And so how do you contend with that? How do you contend with that sort of trauma and grief? How do you, as a country, decide that we're going to move forward even though we can't prosecute these people, but we're going to actually say that this is a healing mechanism for us as a community as a whole? And it does have some real good purposes, but ultimately there were people left feeling very, very angry. And I saw them. They were there. There were women, mothers, wives saying, I don't forgive you. I don't forgive you. I know this tribunal has been set up for me to do so, but I'm telling you right now, you could have come to me. You could have told me where my loved one was. You could have told me more about what had happened, but you didn't. You waited until now, but it's not true. Your penance is not true. Your contrition is not true. And so I wanted to sort of play with that in Machadiso's character.
That brings me to my next question, because Machadiso and Prudence have an exchange when they're in South Africa since it's 1996, and I want to read the quote verbatim. He's talking to Prudence, and he says, "We're all like this. South Africans get on with things, but because we were so busy getting on, we sometimes don't take stock of the beatings we're taking and the things we're giving up until it's bloody too late." Talk more about that. What would getting on, like you said, what does it even look like? What's even a healthy way to get on? Is it just pretending things didn't happen?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they did that. I don't think that they pretended it didn't happen. I think that was the point of the hearings. But I do think that there was a very sort of Christian-centric philosophy of Desmond Tutu was the main. He was the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. And there was this sense that we must forgive, and we must not forget, but we must forgive to be able to move on. And if you see Mandela, he spent 27 years in prison. He didn't come out wanting to harm people, right? And so he put that into action, into this tribunal. But I think with what Machadiso is really trying to say to her is that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost, even if we're doing this as a collective. And we know what it's like to do something as a collective, but not actually feel like it's healing us individually. Even if you think about our current political situation, right? I mean, there are so many times when you can think about how you want people to think of community as opposed to their individual needs, and how sometimes that's the better choice.
And not everyone forgives, and that becomes abundantly clear in the book. Machadiso doesn't forgive, and maybe Prudence doesn't. Like it's different for different people.
Yeah.
And I know you wanted to do a little reading, so it'd be a good place to stop and do that.
Maybe, we'll see. Okay. So I'm going to read 2018 in Washington, D.C. This is when Prudence and her husband are heading to the restaurant. Swollen nuggets of ice fell from the August sky, as if to announce summer's refusal to be predictable. A street lamp flickered through the hail-battered windshield of their car as Prudence's husband, Davis, slowed and turned with the road, hugging the edge of the curb. They were late for dinner. Their sitter, Alice, had arrived 30 minutes after the agreed-upon time, and before leaving, Prudence had needed to make sure Alice recalled all the steps for putting Roland to bed. The music to be played, the position of his pillow, the way his curtains were to be drawn and pinned. After, Prudence and Davis had argued about which of the cars to take into the district. Given the forecast, Prudence thought it best to drive the minivan, but Davis insisted on the Porsche. It was a 1959 Porsche Carrera Speedster, Cherry red, an exact replica of the car in the poster Prudence had taped beside her childhood bed, beneath the off-the-wall cover shot of Michael Jackson. She had long dreamt of this car, and when they first began discussing it, Davis admitted he had never considered such a luxury. He had easily been persuaded, however, when he spied the creamy leather seats with barely a crease. They paid the previous owner with a personal check, and the seller threw in an elegant pair of women's driving gloves, one of which Prudence now flipped inside out, using the fleece to gently wipe condensation from the windshield as Davis reduced his speed. Can't believe how big this hail is, Davis whispered. It's going to cost thousands to get these dents fixed. We should let the restaurant know we're going to be late, she said. They were meeting the new IT genius Davis's firm had recently hired. Davis had been tasked with helping him on board, with making him feel welcome since he had recently moved from Sweden for the position. Davis seemed now to have forgotten all about the man as the tail of the car began tarrying, the back left tire spinning like a pinball. He veered hard to the right, stopping forcefully alongside the curb. The car settled into itself, the engine at a low purr. Shit, did you see that? Prudence rolled down her window, wiped the side mirror with the glove. In it, she saw the shadowy figure of something lumbering onto the sidewalk. Is it a child? Or a dog? I think maybe it's a fox. Davis turned off the engine. They were parked beneath a cherry tree with a thick canopy that deepened the darkness of that already dark night. He switched on his cell phone light. What are you doing? She said. I'm going to go check on it. Then what? Perform CPR on a fox? Prue, you don't leave a thing. Thank you for laughing. Haha. Prue, you don't leave a thing to bleed out. Davis wrenched the door handle and rushed to the rear of the car. The street light flickered, illuminating broken tree limbs that dangled precariously over the hood. Prudence's annoyance was evolving, changing rapidly into anger as she considered Davis's impetuousness, his lack of forethought, as if he couldn't imagine what harm could come to a black couple on a dark road. Now she heard the animal howling, the sound muffled yet urgent. She imagined its sallow eyes and hanging head, imagined the staggering profundity of its fear. A sickening feeling swept over her, and she slapped her hands against her ears, trying not to hear its cry, trying not to be reminded of all her own dead. Davis returned. It's a dog. So much blood. He was breathing heavily, attempting to switch off the phone's flashlight, but his hands trembled. Do you have blood on your shoes? What? Davis said, as though suddenly waking. He wiped droplets of rain from his face. Blood, Prudence said. She reached for his phone, turned off the light. Do you want me to drive? As the street light flickered again, Davis started the car, and Prudence made the call to report the injured dog. Does it look like someone's pet? The woman's voice boomed through Prudence's phone. No, Prudence answered. Yeah, it does, Davis said. Annoyed, Prudence began to push the phone toward Davis when they heard a new, unusual sound. Hello, the woman on the phone said. There was a low, thick growl beneath the rumble of the Porsche's engine. Prudence peeped through the side mirror, thinking the dog had staggered to its feet, but she saw nothing before the street light went out again. The growl, however, blanketed them. Hello, is everything okay? The street lamp flickered back on and flooded the road with a soft, creamy light, only to reveal a man at the front of the car. His reddened eyes seemed to rattle in his head until his sight settled on Prudence. His breath suspended in her chest, the sound of it like a shovel scraping a large rock. Davis reached for her hand, and together they watched the man. The wool of his coat lay flat and matted. The mud stains on his left cheek and across the backs of his large hands were caked and crusty. If you're still there, we'll send someone out as soon as possible, the woman said. Prudence tried not to move, hoping this would deter the man from moving too, but he inched forward. She thought to tell Davis to pull off, but before she could get the words out, the man placed his hands on the hood of the car, leaning over at the waist while his growling grew all the more menacing. Davis nodded faintly as if giving himself a pep talk before shifting the car into drive. Prudence felt the clunk-clunk of the transmission as the man's growl deepened into a roar. She could see into the dark and empty tunnel of his mouth as he climbed atop the hood, gathering himself on all fours, crawling toward them until he pressed his wet and liquored face into the windshield.
And things don't calm down when they reach the restaurant, I'm just going to say. So things were intense there. Hold on, there's more. Well, at the beginning of that passage you read, you reference Roland, their son, and he's autistic, and that interested me. I have an autistic son also. And so I was curious about your decision to make him neurodivergent, and did Did it allow you to explore different parts of Prudence's personality, do you think, that she might otherwise?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, I don't see enough, I think, neurodivergent children on the page. I particularly don't see enough Black neurodivergent children on the page. And Prudence struggles with this child. She is a Black woman who's also got West Indian roots, and there's a certain way that children are to behave, and this child is not trying to behave well at all, not according to her rules, the rules that she's kind of grown up with. And so you see a lot of her sort of internal struggles with, do I admit to my dinner companions that I have an autistic child? Do I respond? How do I respond when he blows up and becomes somewhat violent? And he's a little boy, but he's a big boy. And so how do I deal with trying to protect him? He's in this very big Black boy's body, and she also has to contend with all the things that happen to her child when people don't actually realize that he's autistic, and even sometimes when people know he's autistic. And so there's all these facets of her that I got to explore with this child, but I also got to put this beautiful child on the page, and I hope represent just a little bit of what it's like to sort of, have a neurodivergent kid. Yeah.
And there's a moment at, it's an episode at Roland's school, and it's an interesting sort of exchange because he's getting bullied by a young white boy, and there's maybe a misunderstanding that maybe the teacher didn't see what happened and the boy's father, whatever happens, but Prudence and Davis are able to write a check to make this boy go away. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, does that make her feel powerful, or is it frustrating that she even has to deal with it? Like she has the power to make it go away here, and that's great. But why should she have to make it go away in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. Well, it made me feel good, I have to say. Imagine being able to write a check when you go to the headmaster's office and get these people out. But the thing about that, I wanted to write that because I wanted her to feel that moment of, euphoria and like, I won. Oh, I got these people out. This kid won't badger my child anymore. And then as they're walking out, she realizes, oh, there's a price to pay for this. They're going to come after me. I'm going to have to join the PTA, the forbidden PTA. I'm going to have to be like class party president. I'm going to have to make sure that my kid is like watched all the time because this comes at a cost. Like no matter how much money they have, this little Black child of theirs is probably not going to escape the mere fact that he's a Black boy in America. And so I wanted to have a high and then a real sort of realistic moment in her head as she's walking back.
Well, I'm PTA treasurer, so never join the PTA.
It's the worst job ever.
It's the worst job ever. It's a trap. Don't join the PTA. Sounds good.
I was VP of diversity.
Okay,
just
so
yeah.
It all sounds like fun and games on paper, and then you get in there. So you have, throughout the book, you have transcripts from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. And I wonder, when you were putting the book together and going back and reading these things, did you learn anything new that was either new or that you'd forgotten and then it sort of like brought back to the forefront as you were going through the actual transcripts?
Yeah, well, funny enough, those transcripts were mine. Yeah, so when I was there, I showed up on the very first day, and remember when I said that I couldn't believe what I was hearing? I decided that I was going to write every single word down that I heard. I wasn't completely confident that I was going to ever be able to find the recordings or the transcripts, later on, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write this because I don't think I'm ever going to experience anything like this. And I'm a pretty fast writer, and I also had a paper to write when I came back for law school, so I was like, okay, I'm going to get it all down. And then I put it in a box, and it traveled with me from Ann Arbor to New York to DC and several houses in DC. And my husband, who's in the audience, tried to throw my boxes away many times. And then during COVID, I went into the basement and I unearthed it from the messy basement that I have. And I began to sort of read everything that I wrote, and I was like, oh, I'd forgotten how bad this was. I'd forgotten how much I actually put down. And I put this in the book, but I actually had my own reactions as I was watching it. So I would write down, oh, S-H-I-T, or oh my, and I put that so that Prudence could also be experiencing that same thing. So all the stories that I wrote in the book are what I heard and how I experienced it. And I did go back to South Africa last January or the January before, looking for those recordings. And guess what? It was really hard to find. But I did. Someone actually found it for me at at one of the museums. They sent me an email and said, "I think I found the ones that you need." And I watched them, and I was like, "Oh, good job, Lauren. Your notes are amazing." But they were actually pretty accurate. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you went back to South Africa. So let me ask you hypothetically, if 2018 Prudence went back to South Africa, how would she experience it? Because we only have her in 1996. So if she is the affluent, powerful, adult Black woman going back, what does it look like through those eyes?
Yeah. Well, I wrote a note at the end of the book, and I think that note sort of expresses how I hope Prudence would see it, and it was feeling very hopeful for a country that confused her and disappointed her, but also left her feeling like we can do hard things. And I think that I think she would be really proud. And one of the things that we have to remember about South Africa, it's a 30-year-old democracy, right? What did we look like at 30 years old? Not so good, I'd say. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of things that haven't gone as people wanted it to go. And as you can see in the most recent elections, the ANC didn't win overwhelmingly the way they had been in the previous elections. So there's a lot to be said about the disappointments. But there's also a lot to be said about them trying it over and over and over again, and the people trying over and over and over again. Which brings me back to your question, the first question, which is, the white South Africans who were there, they stayed because they believed in this too. And, and most of them, if you talk to them, they will tell you, we love that this is where we are now. And we know that there's problems, but we're staying here and we're investing as well into this, this dream that Mandela had.
Well, I wanted to ask you a quick question. I referenced the Washington Writers Conference earlier because this came up at that conference too, talking about genre. And you were on the historical fiction panel there. Yeah. And here we're in the mystery thriller tent.
Ah,
and
I didn't even know that.
I couldn't find us on the schedule. I'm like, we're supposed to be just under fiction, right? Or historical fiction, but it was mystery thriller. And it is a thriller. There are thriller aspects and there is a mystery, but there's so much history. So where do you see the book positioned, or does it need to be positioned any particular place?
Yeah. I don't know. These labels are just useless to me as a writer. I know they need them for marketing, but how do I describe this book? There is suspense, and I wrote it so that you would actually not want to put the book down. I wrote it so that you would stay up until 3 a.m. I knew exactly what I was doing, right? And yet I'm a historical fiction writer, despite the fact that I don't want to be. I just think it's so important to actually remember, the past, and to dig in and tell stories about who we were and who we can be. Those are really, really important things for me in any story that I'm telling. So I've got that, and I've got this, and I've got this family drama, and and so figure it out. I feel like we pigeonhole writers, and writers pigeonhole themselves as well. And so it doesn't help me sell a lot of books, though, I tell you, because if I was like, oh, I'm a mystery writer, I would be on the New York Times bestseller, I'm sure. Yeah.
Mysteries are very popular.
Mysteries are popular.
So, we're going to get to questions for the audience in a second, but I did want to. You mentioned earlier you're a fast writer. Tell us a little bit about your process as a writer. And I know everyone's is different, and process can sound highfalutin, but how do you approach a new project when it's percolating?
Wait, did I say I was a fast writer? Okay. I meant to say I'm a fast note taker. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I am actually a fast writer, but having children has actually hindered my ability to sort of write fast.
Imagine.
Yes, imagine that. But during COVID, when I didn't have to be in carpool line and I didn't have to sort of, figure out all the stuff that you have to figure out when you have children in school every day, I wrote 2 books during that time, and I realized what a huge impact mothering has had on my ability to sort of write fast. But I spend a lot of time sort of researching, despite the fact that I don't want to be a historical fiction writer. I keep saying that, right? I spend a lot of time researching, but I don't spend time researching, all out at first. I sort of find what I need. As I'm writing the stories about these characters, I begin to sort of wonder, how can I explain what this thing is happening? Like, I don't take it for granted that a lot of Americans didn't really know what was happening during apartheid. I didn't know. And so I wanted to just sort of, not cater to the reader, but say, hey, it's okay, because they actually intended for you not to know. They controlled the media. They made sure that these stories were not getting out. They really, really did a very effective job of making it seem like the blacks were out of control and we needed to control them, right? And so that was the prevailing narrative. And so it wasn't until, the ANC started to look to Black Americans and also, Black people in the UK and say, hey, we need you all to do more. We need you to come down hard economically on us and to pressure your governments to do that. And so I just sort of wanted to position the reader in discovering this story in the same way that Prudence was discovering the story, and also understanding that there was so much history before apartheid, right? Like, there's a long, long history of tribes and doing their thing, and when people arrive, when the Dutch arrive and the English arrive, and the wars that happen. I could have written a 400. This book is actually kind of short, and I usually write 400-page books, but I decided that I was going to try to do it as quickly as possible to just give you enough of a nugget. So what I hope is that if you read this book, you'll go and find, your own information and do a little bit more of your own digging, because I think that's the fun in reading stories.
Well, and you do a wonderful job of telling facts that are interesting and important, but it doesn't sound like you're teaching us anything. It does not detract at all from the mystery, the thriller aspect, the propulsive narrative part of it. So you do a very good job of painting that picture of South Africa, and you're kind of going to come away learning something and knowing something new, but you won't feel like you're being taught. So don't worry. If you don't like being taught, don't worry. And we're going to turn it over to questions now from the audience.
Holly, you're actually really good at this. Oh.
So this is just a quick question. When you were putting together your outline, did you have any other names for Prudence, or did you settle on that right away?
I did have another name, and then I woke up one morning and I was like, oh, I think this is actually going to be the name, which is so weird because that's not me, is it? Oh, okay. Which is weird because I don't even know that I realized until the very end of the book how Prudence actually was the perfect name for her. Like, I knew one girl growing up named Prudence, and I really try hard not to name my characters after people I know, but I didn't know her that well, so I was like, okay, I can use this one. But it's perfect. Yeah, I mean, it really is perfect. And then her last name is Wright. I crack myself up. So.
I think we have a question over here. Oh, please.
Oh, okay.
How do you feel about the Afrikaners coming to the United States as immigrants, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm disappointed. There are people who actually really need to be here, who have have dire need to be here, right? They sold our current administration a bill of goods about being persecuted. I dare any one of you to go to South Africa and find a white persecuted person. They own 80% of the land in that country. They have 70% of the economic power. There's a very small black middle class in South Africa, and the townships are full and running still. You can't go to Soweto and not see the poverty and not see how unequal the distribution of money is. So it's a joke, and it actually ticks me off quite a bit. So, yeah.
Did you happen to read Trevor Noah's Born a Crime?
Yeah, I love
That,
it.
if any of you have read that, it's his memoir, and it's actually fascinating. And because the way he talks about apartheid and how insidious it is, and it's not like anyone's waving signs at you or lights are flashing.
Yeah.
So, what did you think of that book?
Oh, I love it. Love it. And also, Trevor was, he is a very well-known, the most well-known South African we know in America. And so I so appreciate that he, told his own story and allowed some of South Africa to be shown. And you're right. I mean, Trevor is so good at making sort of the crazy actually funny.
It's very funny.
And so there's a lot of humor in it, and there's a lot of trauma that you can see this middle-aged man now suffered as a young boy. And it's such a good book. I really, really enjoy it. And I think, several people have actually had book clubs where they read his book and my book next to it. I don't know if they match because I haven't actually read Trevor's book in a really long time since it came out. But I'm saying go for it. Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Well, let me ask you, because I suspect, although there are lots of readers in the audience, obviously, I suspect there are some writers in the audience too. So talk a little bit, we only have a couple minutes left, about your origin story as a writer. Like, before you had your first novel, how did it come to be? Because everyone likes to hear how somebody else got their foot in the door and got published.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story that I've repeated a million times. So if you've heard it, just pretend you haven't heard it. I used to work at a law firm in New York, in Manhattan, and I was working on a very big deal, like a mergers and acquisitions deal, and we were closing on Monday morning, and my senior associate, who was, he was sort of in charge of the deal, he said he wanted to go home because the New York Giants were playing in the playoffs, and he didn't want to work on Sunday. And he's like, so he tells the client, hey, I'm going to leave you with Lauren. I'll be here on Monday morning, and everything will be fine. I told her exactly what to do. So the client turns to him and he says, you're going to leave me with the effing coat check, girl? So I walked out of the building, got my coat, walked out of the building, and I went to the closest bookstore because I love to read. But I didn't read a lot when I was in law school because law school took up everything, right? And working took up everything. And one of the people that I loved to read, particularly when I went away with my parents when they paid my fully funded Bahamas vacation, was Stephen King. And so I'm in the bookstore and I'm crying in the stacks, and I remind myself that I have to get back to work. And I go downstairs and I'm standing in the lobby and I'm putting my coat on, and I look to my right and Stephen King is standing there. And I go up to him and I say, oh my God, I love you. And he looks at me, he doesn't say one word. And I imagine that I'm the only Black woman that's ever declared her love for him. So I take it, I think it's a notch on my belt. But anyway, but I walked out of that bookstore that day and I thought to myself, I gotta stop letting these people take my pleasure, my joy. I loved reading so much, and all of a sudden I wasn't reading anymore. And so I sat down the next week after we closed that deal, and I was like, I'm gonna write a book. I don't know what this book is gonna be, but I'm gonna get home at 1:00 in the morning, and I'm just gonna sit here for an hour with my puppy by my foot, and I'm gonna write. And I didn't get that book published, and I didn't get the next book that I wrote published, and then I gave up. And I didn't write for 10 years. And then one day, my grandmother got sick, and she was laying in her bed at the hospital in Brooklyn, and I was sitting next to her, and she could no longer speak. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I've spent every summer in Brooklyn with this woman. I don't know her story at all, and I will never know it now. And that became my very first novel, her story.
And then how long did that take to get published?
So I took a class at the Bethesda Writer Center, which was called How to Write a Novel with 90 Minutes Free a Day. If you can believe that. But what that class taught me was how to squeeze out 90 minutes a day with 2 very small children, and that you could actually write a book if you just did it in small, small pieces. And so it was thrilling. As I was going there every Tuesday, and she'd give us 90 minutes, and I was like getting so much done. And then I'd go home and I'd be like, if you just give yourself 90 minutes. So by the time we were done, I started meeting with the same people who were in that class. We met every Tuesday night, and one day I was finished, and they said, I think this is looking pretty good. You might have to send this out. And so I went to a place called Thriller Fest. Funny enough, I'm here in the Thriller tent. I went to a conference called Thriller Fest in New York, and they actually allow you to sit with agents and pitch your novel or pitch your story for just 3 minutes. And so you have to have a really tight pitch. And that same husband was like grilling me, right? And he's like, get that 3 minutes. So I got it done. I pitched there, and I walked out with 10 offers to submit a full manuscript. And I got my agent there.
So looking back now, what advice do you give the Lauren who was crying in the stacks next to Stephen King?
Yeah,
now that
well,
you have multiple now?
Continue reading. But also, I remember people telling me that like your first try at writing a novel is going to be crap, right? Like just throw it away, it's going to be bad. But that's the oiling that's happening. Don't give up. Just keep working and working. It may never get published, but you're refining your art. You're learning how to do this. And so to me, that's the best thing that could have happened. And I went when I tell you 10 years of not writing, I would see a new. Speaking of which, Dolan Perkins Valdez launched her first book during those years that I was not writing. And I had a friend who knew her and said to me, do you want to go to her launch party? And I said, absolutely not, because it was literally making my stomach in knots that I had given up this thing, and I was watching someone else get this dream that I could have maybe had if I'd not given up. And Dolan and I ended up being friends, and I never told her the story, so don't tell her. But yeah, just imagine how much I could have gone to her, and I could have said, hey, can you help me figure out like how to not give up on myself?
Well, Lauren, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I encourage you all to get the book and read it. You will learn something, but you will also enjoy a thriller. So don't be misled. You will enjoy it. So this has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Holly.
Very much.